The wind howled like a wild animal over the frozen plains. Snow whipped across the jagged hills, stinging Jonas's face even beneath his thick hood. He tightened the straps of his coat and scanned the horizon. The sun had vanished behind a thick wall of clouds, and the sky had turned a pale gray, almost the color of ash. Jonas knew the storm was coming faster than the forecast had predicted. If he didn't act now, it could bury his hut completely and leave him trapped. He tightened the bolts on the solar panels outside his small wooden hut. The wind shook them violently and a loose metal bracket clanged against the frame. Jonas muttered under his breath, "Not now, not now." He grabbed a wrench, twisting the bolts until they were tight enough to withstand the worst of the storm. His breath came in clouds, freezing immediately in the air. Every movement burned his muscles, but he didn't stop. Survival was not about comfort. It was about action. Inside, the hut was simple but warm. A small fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by a few chairs and a cot. Tools were scattered across a wooden table, and shelves held jars of preserved food, spare clothing, and mechanical parts. Jonas had built this place himself over the last 2 years. Alone on this frozen world, he had learned to trust only his own skills. The hut was his fortress, and he knew every inch of it. A sudden gust of wind slammed into the hut, rattling the walls. Jonas stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of the doorway. Through the swirling white, he saw a movement, a figure, barely visible, struggling against the storm. At first, he thought it was a piece of debris, but as it drew closer, he could make out the shape of a person, or something like a person. The figure staggered forward, draped in a shimmering cloak that was torn and covered in snow. Long limbs moved awkwardly, and a faint glow pulsed along the figure's skin. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anything like this before. Humans were not alone in the galaxy, but encounters with alien species were extremely rare, especially in this remote sector. The figure fell to its knees just outside the door. Jonas's first instinct was caution, but the creature was clearly struggling to survive. Without thinking, he stepped forward and opened the door. A blast of icy air rushed inside, followed by the alien woman, who stumbled into the warmth. She froze immediately, her wide, glowing eyes darting around the room. Her skin shimmered like a living light in the dim fire glow, and her elongated fingers clutched at the edges of her torn cloak. She made a soft, alien sound, somewhere between a hiss and a whisper. Jonas stepped back slowly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said in his calm, low voice. "You're safe." The alien's eyes narrowed. She tilted her head, unsure whether to flee or stay. Jonas smiled gently and pointed to the fire. Then he gestured to a blanket draped over the chair. Slowly, hesitantly, she took a small step forward. The snow on her cloak melted slightly in the heat, sending small drops onto the wooden floor. Jonas ignored it. Survival was more important than cleanliness. "Sit," he said, pointing at the chair. "Warm." She hesitated again, but finally lowered herself onto the edge of the chair. Her eyes never left Jonas, flicking over him as if she were trying to understand what he was. He could feel the fear radiating from her, sharp and electric. Her species was not used to humans, or perhaps to anyone outside her own world. She had fled something dangerous, and the blizzard had brought her to him. Jonas pulled another chair close and sat, keeping a safe distance. "Name?" he asked. She shook her head. Another hiss-like sound escaped her lips. Jonas nodded. That was fine. Words were not necessary for survival. He placed a steaming cup of tea on the table, using gestures to encourage her to drink. The warmth made her stiff fingers tremble less, and after a few moments she took a sip. Jonas watched her closely, noting every movement. The alien's cloak had tears in it, and her glowing skin pulsed faintly with color, probably a sign of stress or fear. Jonas reached out slowly and held his palm open. He wanted to show her that he meant no harm. She stared for a long moment and then cautiously touched his hand with one slender finger. The contact was light, almost a brush, but it was enough. She relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained wary. Jonas nodded to himself. Trust would not come quickly, but it would come. He gestured to the table again, indicating the tools and parts lying scattered. Then he picked up one of the small devices he had been repairing earlier, a communicator. It was cracked, and the screen flickered weakly, but it worked enough to emit soft pulses of light. Jonas turned it on and handed it to her. The alien studied it carefully, her fingers brushing the surface. Then she pressed a small button and a faint musical hum filled the room. Her eyes widened. Jonas smiled. Communication, even in small ways, was possible. Minutes passed. Jonas continued his gentle gestures, pointing to himself, then to her, then to the fire. He mimed warmth, shelter, and safety. Slowly, she began to mimic his gestures, first hesitantly, then with more confidence. Each small motion was a step toward understanding. She was learning that Jonas was not a threat, that humans were capable of kindness and patience. Outside, the wind roared like a living beast. Snow battered the hut walls, rattling windows and shaking the door. Jonas could feel the storm pressing against them, trying to force its way inside. He did not panic. He had faced storms like this before, and he knew the importance of calm and steady action. The alien finally spoke, or at least attempted sounds that Jonas could barely recognize. They were not words, not yet, but a rhythm. Jonas listened carefully, then responded with matching tones. It was awkward and imperfect, but it worked. Slowly they were beginning a conversation, one not based on language, but on patience, trust, and shared survival. Jonas moved to the fire and added another log, sending sparks into the air. He gestured for her to sit closer, but she remained at the edge of the chair, watching him like a cautious predator. He understood. This was new for her. Her world had likely been full of familiar shapes and rules. Humans, Jonas realized, were unpredictable, and that made him fascinating to her. Hours passed. The storm outside raged, but inside the hut, a fragile peace had settled. Jonas offered her more tea and a small piece of preserved fruit. She accepted, her hands shaking less with every bite. He gestured to the floor and indicated a small cot. Tentatively, she lowered herself to lie down. Jonas draped a blanket over her shoulders, careful not to touch her directly without consent. For the first time, the alien woman seemed to relax. Her glowing skin pulsed in a slower, steadier rhythm. Jonas sat back, exhausted, but satisfied. He had saved a life, and in the process he had made contact with a being from a distant world. He did not know what would come next, but for now they were safe. As night fell, the storm continued to howl, but inside the hut, Jonas and the alien woman, Liara he decided to call her, shared a quiet understanding. No words were needed to convey the bond forming between them. Humans had a way of surviving, of creating warmth and trust even in the harshest conditions. Liara had seen it firsthand, and she was beginning to understand something new. Humans were not weak. They were strong in ways that could not be measured with weapons or technology alone. Jonas finally allowed himself to rest, leaning back in his chair, his eyes on the fire. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside, a spark of connection had been lit between a human and an alien, two survivors in a frozen world. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but for now they were no longer alone. The wind howled, the snow fell, but inside the little hut, light, warmth, and trust glimmered. And in that small space, Jonas realized something profound. Sometimes, the most extraordinary things happened not in battle or conquest, but in simple acts of care and understanding. He looked at her sleeping figure, glowing faintly in the firelight, and whispered softly, "You're safe here. For now." The blizzard raged through the night, shaking the little hut as if it were a fragile toy. Jonas sat near the fire, watching the alien woman Liara sleep. Her breathing was even, her glowing skin dimmed to a soft, calming light. He knew that. Survival was never just about enduring storms. It was also about understanding those who depended on you, and this stranger depended on him now. Jonas leaned back, thinking of the long road ahead. Communication was difficult. Liara could not speak his language, and he did not know hers. But he was patient. Humans had a way of understanding others even when words failed. That patience, he believed, was as much a tool for survival as any weapon or machine. The morning came with a weak gray light that barely pierced the thick clouds. Jonas stoked the fire, warming the room before Liara awoke. He prepared a small meal of preserved fruit, hot tea, and dried bread, placing it on a tray near her. When she opened her eyes, the glow of the fire reflected in her wide, cautious eyes. Jonas gestured toward the food and smiled gently. He tapped the tray, then pointed to himself, and finally, to her. She hesitated, then took a small piece of bread. Her lips barely touched it, but she chewed slowly, watching him as if testing his intentions. Jonas nodded encouragingly, happy for the small progress. After she finished eating, Jonas sat across from her. He held out a small notebook and a pencil. He drew a simple circle and pointed to himself. Then he drew a shape resembling Liara, indicating her. She tilted her head, curious. Her fingers glowed faintly as she touched the paper, tracing the shapes he had drawn. Jonas watched closely, noting every movement. Communication, he realized, would be slow and painstaking. But it was possible. Name? Jonas asked softly, pointing to himself again. Liara hesitated, but finally made a sound, a soft musical hum rising and falling. Jonas smiled. He nodded, trying to imitate her tone. The sound was strange, alien, but not unpleasant. Liara's eyes widened in surprise. Jonas repeated it, matching her rhythm as best as he could. Slowly, she hummed again, this time with a slightly different pitch. Jonas responded, and the two of them sat in a small circle of sound, each trying to understand the other. After a few minutes, Liara made another sound, then pointed to the window, where the blizzard still roared outside. Jonas understood immediately. She was afraid of the storm. He nodded and pointed at the fire, then at the blanket draped over the chair. Then he patted the cot. Safe, he said. Warm. Liara's fingers brushed against the blanket, then she touched the cot. Finally, she nodded slowly. She understood, or at least trusted him enough to believe she might be safe here. Jonas spent the next hours teaching her simple gestures. He showed her how to build a fire, how to handle the small stove, and how to melt snow into water. She watched intently, mimicking his movements. At first, her motions were awkward, her long fingers knocking over small tools or spilling water. Jonas laughed softly, a warm human laugh, and helped her straighten each mistake without judgment. You learn fast, he said, though she could not understand the words. His tone carried the meaning. She tilted her head, glowing slightly, and imitated his gestures more carefully. As the storm continued, Jonas decided to examine the device she had carried in the blizzard. It was a small metallic box with glowing lines etched across its surface. He had repaired it partially before, enough for it to produce light and a faint sound. Now he tried to restore its full function. Liara watched nervously, stepping back whenever Jonas reached for her device. Jonas paused, holding up his hands. Safe, he said. Then he gestured for her to touch it again. She hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on the device. Jonas worked carefully, adjusting circuits and repairing broken connections. After a while, a small screen flickered to life, displaying glowing symbols. Liara's eyes widened in astonishment. She reached out, touching the symbols. Each touch sent soft pulses through the device, lighting up in response. Jonas nodded, understanding that she was communicating through the machine. He smiled. Even a simple repair could become a bridge between worlds. By mid-afternoon, the storm had not yet passed, but the two had formed a tentative routine. Jonas showed Liara how to gather snow from the roof safely, then melt it for water. He demonstrated how to store firewood, how to check the hut for drafts, and how to secure the door against the wind. She watched carefully, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity. Then for the first time she reached for a tool herself, a small hammer Jonas had used to fix the roof, and mimicked his motions. Her skill was clumsy but improving. Jonas nodded approvingly. "Good," he said. The word held no real meaning for her yet, but his tone conveyed encouragement. She glowed brighter, a subtle sign that she was pleased. As evening approached, Jonas decided it was time to attempt another form of communication. He grabbed the notebook and pencil again. This time he drew simple symbols, a fire, a bed, and a cup. Then he pointed at her and made a motion toward the symbols. Liara studied them, then drew her own symbols in response. Shapes he did not recognize but which clearly conveyed meaning. The act of exchanging symbols was slow but effective. They began to understand each other in ways words could not achieve. Night fell, and the storm outside had not yet weakened. Jonas prepared another small meal. He gestured for Liara to sit close, pointing at the food and the fire. She did, her trust in him growing. She had begun to understand that humans could be relied upon, even when their language was foreign. After eating, Jonas retrieved a small blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She made a sound, soft, almost a laugh, and leaned slightly closer to the fire. Jonas smiled. The moment felt small, but it was significant. Trust, he realized, was not won with grand gestures, but with consistent care and attention. They spent the rest of the evening sharing small gestures and sounds. Jonas would make a movement, then wait, allowing her to respond in her own way. She would hum, then point, then gesture back. Each small interaction built a bridge between two worlds. Jonas realized that Liara had likely never encountered a human before. Her species might have considered humans weak, fragile, or insignificant. But here she was relying on him for survival, and he was proving simply through patience, skill, and compassion that humans could be strong in ways that were unexpected. The fire crackled, filling the quiet hut with warmth and light. Outside, the blizzard roared, but inside, a fragile bond had been formed. Jonas knew that trust, once broken, could not be repaired. But trust built from care, patience, and shared struggle could endure even the harshest conditions. Hours passed. Jonas finally allowed himself a moment to rest, sitting back in his chair and closing his eyes. Liara leaned against the cot, her fingers glowing softly, tracing patterns on the blanket. For the first time, Jonas saw something in her eyes that went beyond fear, curiosity, wonder, and a growing sense of safety. He spoke softly, words she could not yet understand, but his tone carried the meaning. "You are safe. Here, you will not be harmed." She hummed in response, a sound he took as acknowledgement. It was not perfect, but it was enough. The night wore on. The storm continued to batter the frozen world outside, but the hut remained strong. Jonas had built it with care, and now it sheltered more than just himself. It sheltered trust, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of friendship. Jonas reflected on the events of the day. Liara had survived the blizzard because she had found shelter, but more importantly, she had begun to survive emotionally, trusting a human enough to accept his help. That, he thought, was as important as food or warmth. Humans had a way of connecting, of forming bonds even in impossible situations. That bond, he realized, could be more powerful than any technology or weapon. As he watched the fire, Jonas thought about the future. The storm would pass, and Liara would have to continue her journey. But for now they had each other, and that was enough. For the first time since the blizzard began, Jonas felt a sense of hope. He had survived countless storms before, but this was different. This was not just about endurance. It was about connection, empathy, and the human ability to inspire trust and courage even in beings from distant worlds. The night stretched on, long and quiet, Outside, the wind howled, and the snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. Inside, the fire burned steadily, illuminating Jonas and Liara in its warm, golden light. And in that simple, fragile glow, the beginnings of trust had taken root. Jonas finally closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready. Humans had a way of surviving, of adapting, and of forming bonds that no storm or alien world could break. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world outside the hut a frozen, sparkling white. Jonas opened the door carefully, peering out at the soft sunlight reflecting on the thick layers of snow. The wind had calmed, but the cold still bit sharply at his face. He closed the door, knowing that survival required careful planning even after a storm. Liara stood near the window, her glowing skin dimmed to a gentle blue. She watched the snow, her long fingers tracing patterns in the frosted glass. Jonas noticed her curiosity and smiled softly. She was not just surviving, she was observing, learning, and beginning to understand. Jonas gestured for her to sit near the fire again. Today he decided they would attempt to learn more about each other. Communication had improved, but words were still impossible. Symbols, gestures, and sounds were the only bridges between their worlds. He grabbed the notebook and pencil and drew a simple map of the hut, marking the fire, the cot, the table, and the door. Then he pointed to himself, tapping the symbol that represented him. Liara watched carefully, her glowing eyes tracking every movement. She reached out with a slender finger and traced the symbols, then drew her own shapes on the paper, curved, lines and dots that pulsed faintly with her inner light. Jonas studied the patterns, slowly realizing that she was showing him something about her own body, her home, or perhaps her journey. Jonas nodded. He tried to mimic her shapes, adding small dots and lines. Slowly, a dialogue of drawings emerged between them. Words were unnecessary. The shapes, lines, and gestures conveyed meaning. Liara was learning human logic, and Jonas was learning alien patterns. Each day, each interaction built a deeper connection. After their drawing session, Jonas gestured to the table, pointing at the food supplies. Liara's eyes followed his gestures, and she began picking up small items, examining them curiously. Jonas showed her how to open jars, pour water, and heat food safely. She watched intently, absorbing every motion. When she tried herself, her movements were awkward at first, spilling water or dropping utensils, but Jonas never scolded her. Instead, he demonstrated patiently, repeating the gestures until she could do them correctly. Jonas realized something important. Humans had a natural patience that allowed them to teach and to guide. Even in survival situations, empathy and cooperation were powerful tools. Liara was beginning to understand that. Her eyes glowed slightly brighter as she succeeded, and Jonas smiled, noting her growing confidence. After lunch, Jonas took out a small gadget, a handheld device he had repaired the night before. It was a basic communicator, not fully functional, but it could produce light, hum, and simple signals. He turned it on and demonstrated its use. Liara's eyes widened as the device pulsed in response to her touch. Jonas pointed to himself, then to her, and then tapped the device. She understood immediately. The device was a bridge between them. Liara picked it up, experimenting. Each touch caused a soft glow or hum. She made a sound, a musical note that Jonas had not heard before, and the device pulsed in response. Jonas mimicked her note, and she repeated it. A simple conversation had begun using rhythm and light instead of words. Jonas felt a surge of excitement. Humanity had a way of communicating, of creating understanding even across vast differences, and he was witnessing it firsthand. Hours passed in quiet study. Jonas showed Liara how to use basic human tools, a knife for cutting wood, a small hammer for fixing broken parts, and a stove for cooking. She watched carefully, her fingers glowing faintly as she imitated his movements. She was not perfect, but she was learning fast. Jonas realized that her species was intelligent and adaptable, but humans had a unique combination of patience, creativity, and problem-solving that gave them an edge in unexpected situations. Late, in the afternoon, Liara made a sound and pointed to the sky. Jonas followed her gaze and saw distant lights streaking across the horizon. He guessed they were ships or satellites from another colony. Liara's gestures indicated urgency and concern. She tried to make words, but only produced melodic hums. Jonas nodded, understanding her meaning. She had come from far away and she wanted to return home. Jonas smiled faintly. "We will fix that," he said softly. Then he pointed to the device and mimicked repairing it. Liara's glowing fingers brushed his hand in thanks. She did not speak words, but her gesture carried meaning. Trust was building quickly, faster than either of them expected. The evening came, bringing deep shadows and colder air. Jonas stoked the fire, and Liara sat near it, her long limbs tucked carefully under her. She watched him silently, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. Jonas decided it was time to share more about his own world. He retrieved a small tablet containing images of Earth, other human colonies, and basic technology. He tapped on an image of a human colony, showing buildings, people, and machines working together. Liara leaned closer, her eyes widening in wonder. She traced the shapes on the screen, and Jonas pointed to the people, then to himself. He tapped the screen again, showing tools, vehicles, and machines humans had built. Liara made a soft sound, and Jonas realized she was impressed. Humans, she understood, were clever, resourceful, and capable of creating things beyond imagination. Then Jonas pointed to the snow outside, showing how humans survived in extreme conditions. He mimed building shelters, starting fires, and using tools to endure harsh weather. Liara watched, her eyes glowing brighter as she realized humans were not fragile. They were strong, adaptable, and resilient. She began to understand why Jonas had survived the blizzard alone and why she had found safety with him. Jonas reached for a small mechanical part he had been working on. He handed it to Liara, demonstrating how to use it in a simple machine he had built. She watched carefully, then imitated him, using her unique dexterity to fit the part into place. It was not perfect, but it worked. Jonas nodded approvingly. Humans had a way of teaching, of showing others how to learn through doing, and it was effective. As the night deepened, Jonas and Liara shared stories through drawings, gestures, and sounds. She drew symbols representing her home world. Strange. Buildings, glowing rivers, and creatures unfamiliar to human eyes. Jonas drew symbols representing Earth, human colonies, and the machines humans had invented. Slowly, they created a visual map of their worlds and experiences. It was imperfect, but it worked. Understanding was growing. Jonas realized something profound. Survival was not just about enduring storms or fixing machines. It was about understanding others, building trust, and sharing knowledge. Humans had a unique ability to connect, to teach, and to inspire confidence, even in beings from other worlds. Liara was beginning to see that firsthand. Around midnight, Jonas decided it was time for rest. He gestured toward the cot and the blanket. Liara hesitated, then carefully lay down, her glowing skin dimming to a soft blue. Jonas covered her with the blanket, respecting her space, and then settled into his own chair. The fire crackled, sending warmth through the room. Before closing his eyes, Jonas glanced at Liara. She had come to him frightened and alone, but now she trusted him enough to rest in his hut. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Humans had a way of surviving not just with tools, but with empathy, patience, and understanding. That strength, he realized, was as important as any weapon or machine. He whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we learn more." Liara's fingers glowed faintly in response, a silent agreement. Trust had been built, understanding had begun, and a bond had formed between two beings from completely different worlds. Outside, the wind whispered through the frozen plains. Inside, the fire glowed warmly, illuminating the two figures in the quiet room. Jonas knew the storm would return and other challenges lay ahead, but for now, they had learned something more important than survival alone. They had learned that cooperation, trust, and shared knowledge could bridge even the widest gaps between worlds. Jonas closed his eyes, allowing himself to rest. Liara lay near the fire, her soft hums filling the quiet space. For the first time since the blizzard, both felt safe, and both felt the beginnings of hope. In the days to come, Jonas knew they would face storms, challenges, and dangers beyond imagination. But he also knew that humans had a way of rising to any challenge, of teaching and inspiring even the most alien minds. Liara had already begun to understand that. She had seen it in his calm patience, his careful actions, and his willingness to share knowledge and warmth without expectation. The frozen world outside Jonas's hut was deceptive. The morning sun shimmered on untouched snow, turning the landscape into a sparkling white canvas. But Jonas knew better. The storm had passed, yes, but the weather here was unpredictable. Even a small gust could bring treacherous ice, and the hut's roof, weighed down by thick snow, was at risk. Jonas stirred awake before dawn. Liara was already awake, her glowing skin faintly pulsing as she stretched and observed the snowy horizon. She had grown more comfortable in the hut, but her alien instincts made her alert to every sound. Jonas understood. Her species had survived, in ways humans could not imagine, and her caution was natural. He checked the roof from inside. A large layer of ice had formed overnight, pressing against the beams. If it collapsed, it could destroy part of the hut, or worse, injure them. Jonas rubbed his hands together and gathered his tools. Liara approached, curiosity in her glowing eyes. She tilted her head as Jonas gestured toward the roof. "Help?" she asked in her melodic hum. Jonas nodded. The two of them stepped outside, carefully moving across the thick snow. Jonas handed her a long pole he had used for snow measurements. Liara's fingers glowed as she gripped it, and she mimicked his motions, lifting snow carefully from the roof edge. Her alien strength made her faster than Jonas, but her lack of experience with tools made her motions imprecise. Jonas guided her gently, showing her where to push and where to pull. Together, they removed the loose ice and snow, tossing it safely away from the hut. Jonas worked with his hands, hammering wooden supports and checking the beams. Liara watched and then imitated, tapping in exactly the right spots he had shown her. Even though her anatomy was different, her intelligence allowed her to adapt. Jonas smiled. Humans had a natural ability to teach, and cooperation made even the impossible possible. By mid-morning, the roof was secure, but the storm had left its mark elsewhere. Snow had piled against the walls, threatening to block the door. Jonas gestured for Liara to help shovel. She approached cautiously at first, unsure how to hold the human shovel. Jonas demonstrated, showing how to dig with leverage and strength. She copied his motions, and together they cleared the heavy snow. Once inside, Jonas decided it was time to combine human ingenuity with alien abilities. Liara had strength and agility beyond human limits, while Jonas had tools, experience, and knowledge. He grabbed a small solar-powered heater and some reflective panels he had made. Inside, he gestured, showing her how to attach the panels near the fire. Liara's glowing fingers traced the lines he drew, and then she helped secure the panels in place. Jonas turned the heater on and the small room became noticeably warmer. Liara made a soft sound, her way of expressing amazement. Jonas smiled. Together they had made the hut warmer and safer than before. The day progressed, and Jonas realized the storm had caused more hidden dangers. A nearby tree, weakened by ice, leaned perilously close to the hut. If it fell, it could break the roof or walls. Jonas showed Liara how to inspect the tree and test its stability. She moved with careful precision, using her long limbs to probe branches Jonas could not reach. "You, strong," Jonas said, pointing to her arms. Liara made a soft, musical hum, pleased with his recognition. Humans had a way of noticing skill and strength, and she appreciated it. Jonas then showed her how to use a simple rope and pulley system to stabilize the tree temporarily. Liara watched, then helped him tie knots, her glowing fingers careful not to slip. The system held, and the tree no longer threatened the hut. Jonas nodded in satisfaction. Together, human intelligence and alien capability had solved the problem. As evening approached, Jonas realized that survival was not just about tools or strength, it was about adapting. He showed Liara how to combine their abilities in other ways. He built a simple wind guard using spare wood and snow, while Liara held beams in place with her strength. She lifted, adjusted, and shifted with precision that Jonas could not match alone. The structure was stable, and both of them felt a sense of accomplishment. Afterward, Jonas prepared a meal. He melted snow for water, heated the stove, and prepared some preserved vegetables and protein bars. Liara watched him, her glowing eyes reflecting curiosity. Jonas gestured for her to help, and she mimicked his motions, arranging the food and utensils carefully. She was learning quickly not just survival but the subtle human ways of cooperation and shared responsibility. While they ate, Jonas decided to learn more about Liara's world. He grabbed the notebook and pencil and gestured for her to draw. She traced strange shapes, buildings that shimmered, landscapes that glowed, and beings unlike any humans. Jonas nodded thoughtfully. He tried to draw Earth, human cities, and machines. Liara watched closely, her glowing eyes flicking from his drawings to the firelight. Slowly, she began to understand that humans were builders, inventors, and problem solvers. Jonas explained in gestures and sounds how humans had survived in extreme environments, frozen worlds, deserts, even outer space. Liara made soft, musical tones as if impressed. She had assumed humans were fragile. Now she realized that humans had something unique: ingenuity, adaptability, and determination. The night came quickly. The wind outside had returned, though not as strong as before. Jonas stoked the fire and gestured for Liara to rest near the heat. She hesitated, but then lay down, watching him. Jonas pulled a blanket over her, careful not to disturb her. He reflected on the day. Humans had a special strength, he realized, not just in their muscles or tools, but in their minds. They could solve problems, adapt, and teach others, even beings from entirely different worlds. Liara had learned more in a single day than he had expected. She had seen human patience, skill, and courage, and she respected it. Jonas finally settled into his chair. He watched Liara sleep, her fingers glowing softly as if tracing patterns in the blanket. He knew the storm would return eventually. Life on this planet was harsh, and survival required constant vigilance. But he also knew they could endure it together. Humans had a way of combining intelligence with empathy, of finding solutions in impossible situations. That, he realized, was as powerful as any weapon. Before closing his eyes, Jonas whispered, softly, "Tomorrow, we will prepare for anything." Liara's soft hums responded, a silent acknowledgement that she understood. They had faced danger, worked together, and learned from one another. Trust had grown, stronger than before, and a bond had been forged in the shared struggle. Outside, the frozen plains glimmered under the moonlight. The blizzard might return, but Jonas and Liara were ready. Together, human ingenuity and alien skill had created safety, warmth, and hope. In that small hut, the power of collaboration had turned survival into more than endurance. It had become understanding, learning, and respect. Jonas closed his eyes, feeling the quiet strength that came from knowing he could protect another life, even one so different from his own. Liara lay nearby, her soft glow illuminating the room. She had come to him frightened, lost and alone. Now she trusted him. She had seen human intelligence, patience, and courage firsthand, and in that moment, Jonas knew something extraordinary. Humans could survive and thrive not just through strength or weapons, but through creativity, empathy, and the willingness to work with others, even beings from distant worlds. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. Outside, the wind whispered, carrying the promise of more challenges. But inside, the hut was secure, and two unlikely allies had learned to trust each other. Together, they were ready for whatever the frozen world might throw at them next. Jonas smiled faintly and whispered again, "We can do this, too." Liara's glowing hand brushed his, a small gesture of understanding and trust. They had faced danger, adapted, and overcome. And in the quiet of the night, Jonas realized that humanity's greatest strength was not just survival, it was the ability to inspire trust, create solutions, and form bonds that no storm, no matter how fierce, could break. The night stretched long, quiet, and peaceful. The storm might return, the world might remain harsh, but inside the little hut, warmth, intelligence, and trust glimmered like a beacon. Jonas and Liara had learned to work together, and that knowledge, that partnership, would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun rose slowly over the frozen horizon, turning the snow into a dazzling sea of white. Jonas stepped outside his hut, taking a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. The blizzard had passed completely, leaving the world calm, but still harsh. He turned to see Liara standing near the doorway, her glowing skin pulsing softly in the morning light. She looked at him, her large eyes reflecting both wonder and hesitation. Jonas knew this day would come. Liara had survived the blizzard, learned to trust him, and shared days of survival, learning, and cooperation. But now, she would have to continue her journey. Her world waited for her, and her people needed her safe return. He gestured to her device, the small communicator he had repaired for her. It flickered faintly, alive and functional. Liara approached it, her fingers brushing the controls carefully. The device hummed in response. Jonas understood. She was ready to call for help. "You're home," he said softly, pointing to the horizon. "Safe." Liara's glowing eyes met his, and for a long moment she did not move. Then she made a soft, musical hum, acknowledging his words. She had learned much from him, but leaving would not be easy. Jonas decided to help her prepare. Together they checked the communicator, ensuring the signal was strong. Jonas demonstrated how to operate the remaining functions. Liara observed, then repeated his actions with precision. Even though she had alien abilities beyond his own, she recognized that human ingenuity, the ability to think, adapt, and solve problems, was invaluable. Once the device was ready, Jonas turned to the hut. He gestured to the small modifications he had made during the storm: the reinforced roof, the insulated walls, the solar-powered heater. Liara examined each carefully, her glowing fingers tracing the lines of human innovation. She had survived harsh weather, but she now realized that humans had ways of preparing for danger that were clever, resourceful, and effective. Jonas smiled. Good team," he said, pointing to her and then to himself. Liara's soft hums answered, her way of expressing agreement. Trust and respect had grown between them, built not through words but through action, cooperation, and survival. Before she left, Jonas wanted to give her a small gift, a token of human thoughtfulness. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small hand-carved charm shaped like a snowflake. It was simple, but it represented resilience, adaptability, and endurance. He held it out to Liara. She stared at it for a long moment, then touched it lightly. Her fingers glowed brighter and she hummed softly. Jonas nodded. The gift had meaning, even across worlds. Humans could inspire understanding and respect, even without shared language, through small gestures of care. Liara adjusted her cloak and turned toward the horizon. Jonas followed, standing at the doorway as she activated her communicator. A faint pulse of light signaled a response from her people. She had succeeded in calling for rescue. Jonas felt a mix of pride and sadness. She was leaving, but she would carry knowledge of human skill, patience, and courage back to her world. "Go," he said gently, pointing to the signal. Liara hesitated, then looked back at him. Her eyes reflected a deep appreciation, not just for survival, but for the human way of thinking, adapting, and cooperating. Jonas waved subtly, encouraging her forward. Liara activated her device fully, and a small hovering craft appeared in the distance. Jonas watched as it approached, the snow swirling around it in a controlled whirl. She climbed aboard carefully, checking her controls with precision learned from both her species and Jonas's guidance. Before departing, she activated a small light on the craft, sending a soft pulse toward Jonas. It was her way of saying goodbye, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Jonas responded with a wave, a simple human action, but one that carried meaning across species. The craft lifted off slowly, rising above the snow and ice. Jonas felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had helped another being survive, had taught and shared knowledge, and had formed a bond built on trust. That was the essence of humanity, he realized: care, intelligence, and courage even in the harshest conditions. As the craft disappeared over the horizon, Jonas returned to the hut. The wind was calm, and the snow glimmered under the rising sun. He reflected on the past days, the blizzard, the dangers, the lessons, and the small victories. Liara had come to him frightened and alone. Now she left confident, capable, and inspired by the human spirit. Jonas set about tidying the hut. He repaired small damage from the storm and adjusted the solar panels. His thoughts wandered to Liara and her world. She would tell her people about humans, about intelligence, resilience, and ingenuity. Humans did not conquer worlds through fear alone. They thrived through adaptability, empathy, and cleverness. As he worked, Jonas remembered the moments of cooperation during the storm, moving snow from the roof, stabilizing the tree, installing heaters and panels. Each act was small in isolation, but together they demonstrated the power of human thought combined with teamwork. Even an alien from another world could see it clearly. By midday, the hut was secure, warm, and functional. Jonas stepped outside again, looking at the snow-covered landscape. The world remained harsh, but he felt prepared. Humans had a way of learning, adapting, and preparing for the worst. That knowledge gave him confidence. He sat by the fire inside, thinking about Liara. Her curiosity, her willingness to learn, and her recognition of human ingenuity were remarkable. But more than that, she had come to trust him. Trust, Jonas realized, was the most valuable thing humans could offer. It was not given lightly, but once earned, it was enduring. Jonas pulled out the notebook and began sketching again, this time documenting the modifications and repairs he had made during the storm. He wrote notes for future travelers or humans who might come to this remote world. Sharing knowledge was another human trait, one that transcended language and species. Even as he worked, Jonas's mind wandered to possibilities. What if humans could share their methods of survival and ingenuity with other species? What if trust, empathy, and intelligence could create alliances across worlds? He smiled at the thought. Humanity had the power not just to survive, but to inspire others by example. The day drew to a close. Jonas stepped outside once more, watching the pink and orange hues of the sunset over the frozen plains. The world was silent, except for the soft crunch of snow beneath his boots. He thought of Liara's craft, now a tiny dot on the horizon, carrying knowledge of humans back to her people. Jonas whispered softly, "Safe journey." It was a human expression of care, simple yet meaningful. In return, Liara's soft hums echoed in his memory, a reminder of the bond they had formed. That bond would last, even across the vast distance between worlds. As night fell, Jonas returned to the hut. He stoked the fire, preparing for the long, cold night. The storm might return, the world might remain unforgiving, but he felt ready. Humans had a way of facing challenges, of adapting, and of teaching others to survive. That strength, he knew, was part of what made humanity extraordinary. He lay down near the fire, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Outside, the snow glittered under the moonlight. Jonas reflected on what had happened: the blizzard, the alien visitor, the trust, and the lessons learned. Humans had survived not through brute strength alone, but through intelligence, patience, and empathy. Even an alien from a distant world had recognized it. Jonas closed his eyes, feeling a quiet pride. Liara had gone, but she carried with her knowledge of humanity, our ingenuity, courage, and capacity for trust. That knowledge would travel far beyond this frozen planet, reaching a world that had never seen humans before. In the quiet of the night, Jonas realized something extraordinary. Humans could inspire, teach, and connect across worlds without weapons or dominance. Through patience, skill, and empathy, they could survive and thrive even in the harshest conditions. That, he knew, was the essence of humanity. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the air. Jonas drifted to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new opportunities. Humans had a way of rising to any challenge, of learning, adapting, and forming bonds that could bridge even the vastest distances. And somewhere across the frozen plains, Liara's craft moved steadily toward her homeworld, carrying not just a traveler but the story of humanity, a story of ingenuity, courage, and the power of trust. Jonas slept peacefully, confident that he had done something remarkable. Humanity had survived another storm not alone, but with empathy, intelligence, and the ability to inspire others, even aliens from distant worlds. The night passed quietly. The wind whispered softly over the snow, carrying with it the promise of new adventures. Jonas's hut remained warm and secure, a symbol of human resilience. And though Liara had departed, the bond they had formed would endure, a reminder that humans could thrive not only on their own strength, but through patience, cooperation, and understanding. In the vast frozen world, one human had proven that, even in isolation, humans could inspire trust, teach survival, and forge friendships that transcended species. That was the power of humanity, the ultimate proof that humans were special, strong, and extraordinary in ways the galaxy had never yet fully realized.